Hi, is this
Hi, Paula. Thanks so much for joining us here today, and thanks to our viewers for tuning in with Paula Yu, who wrote this amazing book, Rising from the Ashes. This book has won the Young Adult Library Service Association Excellence Nonfiction Award, and it has also won 5 Best Book of the Year awards. So she's here today to present some things about this book.
Oh, hi, thank you so much. So I guess I can just start, right? This is my presentation. So, all right, thank you. It's been a while since I've done Zoom. I've been doing a lot of in-person stuff, so I might be a little rusty, but hello, everyone. I'm going to talk about, I have about 40 minutes, and I'm just going to talk about a little bit about my writing journey and about some of my books, but focusing mostly on From a Whisper to, I'm sorry, wrong book, for Rising from the Ashes, and I'm going to show a little keynote presentation in a second. Before I start, I do want to remind everyone that the pictures presented in my presentation are for educational purposes only, and they're copyright protected. So I kindly ask that everyone refrain from taking screenshots and posting on social media because we do have the permission, the gracious permission and licensing fees for these photos. So thank you in advance for that. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm going to share the screen. And I think you're about to see my screen. And let me go over here. And I'm going to hit play. Esther, can you give me a thumbs up to let me know that you can see just Charlotte's Web on the screen? Is that it? Good, thank you. All right, so let's get going. It's 2:10, so I'm going to try to end at about 2:40, 2:45. And we've got a while for this program. So first of all, we have Charlotte's Web. I always open with this. And the reason why is because I know many people have read this book. It's a classic book from children's literature. And I actually read this book in the first grade and I fell in love with it. I read it I think 1,000 times in a row in the first grade. And I was inspired by Charlotte to become a writer. So when I turned 7, I wrote my first novel and I sent it off to Harper and Row, which was a publisher at the time. They're now called HarperCollins because they published a lot of books that I liked. And I told them, I said, dear Harper and Row, I sent you my novel. I'm in the second grade. Think you should publish it. It's a really good book. And they wrote a lovely letter back saying, Dear Paula, you are an amazing, really talented child writer. You should try out for our children's writing contest for kids ages 7 to 10. And I remember ripping up the letter saying, I'm not a child writer, I'm a real writer. And the reason why I tell that story is that it took about 34 years before HarperCollins accepted my first novel called Good Enough. It was published in 2008. So I often tell that story for anyone who's an aspiring writer that you face a lot of rejection. It's a lot of hard work. So it's not just about being talented. You have to work hard and be persistent. So that's kind of my story as to how I became a writer. I have 12 books published, children's picture books and young adult novels. And I also am a TV writer producer. I've written for everything from NBC's The West Wing to Supergirl on the CW, and I've sold a few pilots. So I either I'm writing for TV or I'm writing my books, but I'm constantly writing. So that's my story. And oh, and the other thing too that I want to mention is I was also uh, a journalist. I wrote for the Detroit News, the Seattle Times, and People Magazine. I majored in English in college and then got my master's in journalism. And I also got my MFA in creative writing. So I write in several different fields. And I think now, today, especially since the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, which I'm a part of, we were just on strike in 2023. So it shows you that you kind of have to be well versed in different types of writing to make sure that um, you always have a job or anything. So that's kind of my story as a writer in a nutshell. Now I'm going to the next slide, and this is some drawings that I found when I went home to visit my family in Connecticut. I grew up there. And when I was looking at the box of drawings, I noticed that at first, you can see on one picture on the left, there's a picture of me. I'm playing the violin because I play violin for fun. I'm a professional freelance musician when I'm not writing, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. But you can see I clearly identify with my black hair, brown eyes. I identify as Korean American. But if you look to the right, you'll see a picture of me with blonde hair, and that's because after a while, well, as a child, all I ever saw were children that looked like Fern. And the thing is I identified with Fern. I identified with her humanity because she was a great character. I mean, I don't know if you remember the opening page of Charlotte's Web, but it's basically she stops her farmer father from killing Wilbur, her future pet pig. She saves the life of a pig. That's amazing. She's this plucky, heroic, brave little girl, and I really identified with that. But because all I ever saw were girls that looked like her, I kind of lost my identity and I started seeing myself, blonde hair and blue eyes, and I kind of lost my Korean heritage and my identity. So in 1987, I was a senior in high school. I'm a Gen Xer. And this was a famous Time magazine article that came out that talked about those Asian American whiz kids. And it was about the model minority myth, which back in the 80s was considered it was perpetuated as a positive stereotype. And I had a lot of people ask me in high school, well, Paula, at least it's a quote unquote positive stereotype. I'd rather be stereotyped as someone who's really good at math, who goes to the Ivy Leagues, who plays the violin, doesn't rock the boat, works really hard. How are those not considered positive stereotypes? And the problem with the model minority myth is that it's not a positive stereotype. There's no such thing as that. All stereotypes are very toxic and can lead to violence, to racism, and a lot of unpleasant moments. And the reason why I bring this up, and I'll be talking about it more as we get into my books, is that this is me at age 7. Yes, I played the violin. I'm really good at the violin. I still play professionally. I took AP Calculus. I went to an Ivy League school. I went to Yale. I kind of fit a lot of this model minority myth stereotype. But what that does is that diminishes my humanity. It trivializes my individual achievements. I'm just actually a little girl who loves music. Why does that have to be a stereotype? So then by doing that, it erases my humanity and my individual character and I become part of a monolith. And that's what led this model minority myth would lead to other acts of violence against Asian Americans throughout our history. You know, you have the model minority myth, which was applied to the railroad workers, the Chinese immigrants who came over. And that led to the fact that the Chinese were often told, hey, we're going to let you carry the dynamite, which is very volatile, because you're only being paid 50 cents an hour as opposed to a dollar for the white workers. So your lives are cheaper and not worth it. So you see, and so basically, hundreds of thousands of Chinese immigrants were injured and often killed carrying this volatile dynamite. So you see where that goes. You also see the model minority myth coming into play during the early years of the pandemic and the lockdown, where we saw a spike in 12,000 anti-Asian hate crimes. So that's why the model minority myth is very negative and very toxic and problematic. Now, I did write about the model minority myth for my first novel that was published in 2008 by HarperCollins, who said that I was a child writer. So I basically use humor as a way to take a more serious look, but also with humor to look at the model minority myth. And I wrote about my life as a violin orchestra geek in high school, and I kind of explored the humanity behind the stereotype in that book. And then this is just a picture of all the books that I've written over the years. And I'm going to talk mainly about Rising from the Ashes. But before I get to that, I do want to talk briefly about From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry, the killing of Vincent Chin and the trial that galvanized the Asian American movement. So, with this book, which won many awards, it was published in 2021. It was about the life of Vincent Chin. He was the first Asian American civil rights hate crime federal trial to ever happen in 1982. He was, in a nutshell, he was attacked by two white men in 1982 who allegedly blamed him for the hundreds of thousands of layoffs in Michigan and across the country in the auto industry, because at the time, Michigan is home to Henry Ford, who invented the automobile, and the big three. You have GM, Chrysler, and Ford. And at the time, we had an oil crisis, gas prices were going through the roof, and American cars were not selling as well. They were considered kind of what we called gas clunkers because they were big, they used up a lot of oil, they weren't very economically efficient. So Americans were starting to buy these new cars from Japan and Europe, the import cars that were smaller and more fuel efficient, including these new cars called Honda and Toyota and Datsun and so forth. So he was killed at the height of what was anti-Asian racism, because there was a spike in anti-Asian hate crimes because of the layoffs and because of this quote unquote trade war we were having with Japan at the time. And I know it sounds very familiar because we're kind of going through the same thing again. We had the spike in anti-Asian hate crimes because of COVID in 2020. And then now we're having a quote unquote trade war with the tariffs and what's happening with China. So, what happened was the two men that killed him were found guilty of manslaughter and just given a few years probation and a $3,000 fine each. And this outraged the Asian American community. So, they banded together across the country to fight for justice for Vincent Chin. And that's what led to the second trial, in which one of the men was found guilty of violating Vincent Chin's civil right to be in a place of public accommodation on account of his skin color. And back then, even people in the ACLU, not everyone believed that the Civil Rights Act applied to Asian Americans and Latinos and other people of color who were not Black. Back then, it was considered a black and white issue only. So that's why Vincent Chin's case was important, because it kind of brought about the importance of Asian American civil rights as well. Now, this is me in Detroit in 1993 when I was a reporter at the Detroit News. I knew about Vincent Chin back then. And this is Vincent Chin when he was a young man in Detroit. And this is the tragic news that happened when he was killed. He was killed actually on the night of his bachelor party. He was supposed to get married. And these are the two men, Ronald Ebens and Michael Nitz, who were found guilty of manslaughter. And this is an example of the poster and the rallies that happened across the country in Detroit, everywhere, which would lead to the first civil rights case. And I will say that due to a technicality, there was a second trial, and so both men were acquitted and found not guilty. So that was unfortunate, and we lost that battle, but we didn't lose the war because, as you see here, it's not fair were the last words Vincent Chin said before he was killed. And I'm going to fast forward 40 years later to the Stop AAPI Hate movement that happened in 2020 because of the COVID-19 lockdown. And what's interesting is you see how similar this looks, right? And this would lead to President Joe Biden at the time signing in 2021 the COVID-19 Anti-Asian Hate Crimes Act. And Vincent Chin's name became very popular during the early years of the pandemic. And this law was signed into effect just a few days after what would have been his 66th birthday. So that's something I wanted to share with everyone. Now we're going to talk about my new book, Rising from the Ashes. And the reason why I brought up Vincent Chin was in my research, the Black community, especially in Detroit with Congressman John Conyers and civil rights activist and presidential candidate at the time, Reverend Jesse Jackson, fought on behalf of Vincent Chin. We owe a debt of gratitude to the Black community for standing up for justice for Vincent Chin. And in fact, Jesse Jackson became best friends with Vincent Chin's mother, Lily Chin. And when the 2021 Atlanta spa shootings happened in March of 2021 when Robert Aaron Long, a white man, went to three different spas in Atlanta. They were all Asian owned, and he killed 8 people, 6 of whom were Asian American women. The sheriff at the time, just like the judge who gave the probation and the small fine to the killers of Vincent Chin, the white sheriff at the time in Atlanta in 2021 said, oh, this was not a racist hate crime. And that caused a huge backlash and a lot of outrage. So right now he is actually on trial for violating these 6 women's civil right to work at the spas. And Jesse Jackson wrote a beautiful essay about that for the Chicago Sun-Times. You can Google it. And he talked about his friendship with Vincent Chin's mother. So I started thinking about the Black and Asian American communities and our relationships together. And I'm kind of, as you know, I kind of talk very casually, and I kind of, every time I give this speech, I kind of include new information. I just saw the movie Sinners, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen. It is going to win all the Oscars. It's an amazing movie. And one of the most amazing things in that movie is that Ryan Coogler does a very nuanced and deep dive into Asian American and Black American relationships. And he focuses on a Chinese American couple in the movie who were part of a huge community of Chinese Americans who emigrated to the Mississippi Delta. And what's really interesting is that out of the couple, one of the Chinese Americans in the couple is very much an ally of the Black community, whereas the other person has a more transactional relationship with the Black community and wants to be more what we call white adjacent. So that's kind of both sides of the same coin in terms of the Asian American relationship with the Black community. So, in researching, I found out, and this is mentioned in my book on Vincent Chin, that the term Asian American was coined in 1968 by 2 Asian American grad students at UC Berkeley, and they coined this phrase as a political phrase to join forces in solidarity with the Black Panther Party. And I started thinking every time we talk about Asian Americans and the Black community, oftentimes we just see stereotypes. You know, to give you an example, more than 75% of anti-Asian violent crimes from 2019 to 2023 were done by white perpetrators. However, the only thing you ever saw in the news were video of young Black men knocking over elderly Asian people. And so you have to ask yourself, why is that the only thing we see when the statistics prove otherwise? And I do want to say before I start talking about the book is that yes, anti-Blackness does exist in the Korean American community and all the Asian American communities. Anti-Blackness exists in all of our communities. And we often talk about Black Lives Matter, and then there are people that say, but what about all lives matter? And the reason why it's important for non-Black communities of color to say Black Lives Matter and to support and respect and understand the debt of gratitude we owe for the Black civil rights community is because if we don't say Black Lives Matter, then none of our lives matter. And so that's something that I think the Asian American community is really trying to bring back and emphasize that, we are allies, we have to stand in solidarity together. And so that's something that I explore. And a friend of mine, Kalayan Mendoza, created this poster called Koreans for Black Lives, No Justice, No Peace. And this happened during the George Floyd uh, Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. Now we're going to go into my book. I'm just looking at my watch. I have about maybe 20 minutes, so I'm going to try to get through all of this. So my book is called Rising from the Ashes, Los Angeles, 1992. Edward J. Sung Lee, Latasha Harlins, Rodney King, and a City on Fire. Now I am Korean American. How can I write about the what we used to call the LA riots? We now call it the Los Angeles uprising. A lot of times people think about Rodney King, an unarmed, innocent black motorist who was beaten almost to death by four non-black Los Angeles Police Department officers. How can I'm trying not to co-opt that story. I'm not trying to misappropriate or take over another community's story. So the way I approached this book was I wanted to write about it through the eyes and through the point of view of three families. So you see here, the Los Angeles Times, this is night one. After one night, 25 people were killed, over 500 people injured, 1,000 blazes. By the end of the 5 or 6 days of the LA uprising, it would end up becoming 63 people killed, over 5,000 people injured, 13,000 people were arrested, and there were 3,600 fires. The fires were so great that you could see them from space. NASA got upset. They thought that a volcano had exploded. Scientists were scrambling to look at these unusual satellite pictures that were being broadcast back to NASA and to these scientific institutions, and we found out it was because LA was on fire. Same thing happened in January 2025. We had the Los Angeles wildfires, and when I interviewed people from my book, they all said that they had PTSD. They were triggered by the wildfires of 2025 because it looked exactly like what happened in 1992. I actually wrote a blog about it with some fresh quotes from people that I interviewed, including a Los Angeles firefighter as well, that you can check out on my website. Now, I decided to tell this story through the point of view of three families. You have Edward J. Song Lee. He was killed just 2 weeks before his 19th birthday, trying to protect a store in Koreatown from being burned down. Because out of the $1 billion in damage, almost half was disproportionately in Koreatown. And we're going to talk more about that in a second. I also interviewed the family of Rodney King, who was the unarmed motorist who was nearly beaten to death by the LAPD. And then I also interviewed the family of Latasha Harlins. She was a 15-year-old black teenage girl who went to buy a bottle of orange juice at Empire Liquor, which was owned by Sunja Du's family, a Korean American immigrant family. And Sunja Du wrongly accused Latasha of uh, of shoplifting when she wasn't, and there was a dispute, there was a physical struggle, and it led to Sunja Du shooting and killing Latasha Harlins. She, like the two men that killed Vincent Chin, was found guilty of manslaughter, but the white judge also presiding over this case, and this time instead of Judge Charles Kaufman, who gave the probation sentencing for Ronald Ebens and Michael Nitz, we now had a white judge named Joyce Carlin who felt pity for Mrs. Dew and said, "You're never going to do this again. I'm going to give you a $500 fine and a few years of probation." So that angered the communities in LA, and they wanted justice for Latasha as well because it cheapened her life, this sentencing and probation. I'll be getting a little bit more into all of that in detail. Now, before I do, I want to take a step back and talk about how what happened in 1992 did not happen overnight. It took decades, if not centuries. And let's start with the Korean community. We emigrated to Los Angeles in 1995. And I love showing this photo because this was the original Koreatown in Riverside, California in the early 1900s. And I call it Korean Bridgerton because I never get to see Korean Americans dressed up in period. Like, it's not period costume, it's their actual clothes. But, a lot of times we get the "you're fresh off the boat, you go back to where you came from." And it's like, no, we've been in this country for centuries. So I always love seeing this photo. Now, I also talk about redlining in my book. So at the turn of the century in the 1920s, you also had what we call the Great Migration of Black American families from the Deep South who said, I'm tired of redlining, I'm tired of lynching and sundown towns. I'm moving to California where there's Hollywood, palm trees, it's sunny all the time, there's the beach. But what these families didn't know in the 1920s was they were moving to California, Southern California, where we also had sundown towns. Glendale was a sundown town. We had redlining, which meant that white families were allowed to not sell their homes to black families. That was later found illegal. That was found unconstitutional in 1945. So if you look at these maps back then, if you wanted to buy a house, you wanted to live in the blue and the green areas. You didn't want to live in the yellow and the red areas because that was where black and non-white families where they mostly lived. And then also too, the black families in the 1920s did not realize that California had the highest number of KKK members outside of the Deep South. And in fact, most of our KKK members were judges and sheriffs. They were in positions of power. So that led to a lot, this kind of was what was setting up the fires for 1992. So once redlining was found illegal, we then started building freeways that split LA. For example, the 10, the Santa Monica Freeway, split LA. If you lived above the 10, you were in a very nice white rich community. If you lived below the 10, you were in a poor neighborhood and it was mostly black and people of color. So we had that as well, and that decimated the black middle class who had just started establishing these beautiful suburban neighborhoods that got destroyed and dismantled by these freeways that came in. So that led to the 1965 Watch Rebellion. And it was very similar to what happened to Rodney King, a young man, traffic violation stop turned violent. And it would lead to this. And after just one night, as you can tell, it's 25 people, just like Los Angeles. And what's interesting is if you look at the headlines, it starts to get racialized. Look at how the riots are being described now. So, a lot of times with civil unrest and what happened in 1992, 1965, what happened in 2020 with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, a lot of times in terms of media coverage, in terms of politicians, how these moments of rightful protest and civil unrest happen, they often get racialized and people start to ignore the real elephant in the room, which is systemic racism and laws steeped in centuries of white supremacy. So that's something we need to look at in terms of how civil unrest is even written about and racialized. So this is the night that Rodney King was beaten. It was the first time an unarmed black motorist, black man, was filmed and it went viral. This was the first viral video. Now this is Rodney King today. This is where these are the images that we know of Rodney King. A lot of people don't know Rodney Glenn King, the man who loved fishing, who loved music and the LA Dodgers, and was a huge family man. And he was a ski bum. He would wake up his daughter Laura at the crack of dawn. She told me to say, "Let's go skiing. There's fresh snow on Mammoth." So he was a girl dad. Like this is the Rodney King that I was honored to know through his family when I interviewed him, not this image. This is where he was beaten. I went to visit the site today. This is the man, George Holliday, who took the video. Now, if you look at that Sony camcorder, that was the height of technology back then. We thought cameras would never get any smaller. I didn't know we'd have iPhones, 30 years later. I mean, everyone had a camcorder. So I often tell young people to think about that camcorder was like our version of the iPhone. Now, the Japanese American man in the picture at the bottom, hopefully I'll have time to talk about him, but his name is Craig Fuji. We worked together as journalists when I worked at the Detroit News. He was an Associated Press photographer at the time who lived in LA, and he took that photo. We'll come back to him in a second. And then these are some pictures. Oh, I do want to say, I forgot to say this up front, but there are going to be some very triggering and violent photos. So I'm going to warn you now, you're going to see some violent photos. So if you'd like to turn away or close your eyes, I recommend you do that. This is a photo of Rodney King's injuries. This is him at a press conference. He had several surgeries, almost lost sight in his left eye, and so forth. And he did suffer a little bit of brain damage from what happened to him. So I do want to just warn you. I will warn you ahead of time with these photos. This is his daughter Laura, whom I interviewed. This is a book report she wrote about what happened to her father a few weeks after the beating. And she wrote, I was sad and my mother was sad. The policeman should have been in big trouble. My father is okay now. And if you look at it, you can see it. If you look closely, you can see the man not frowning in the car. That's her father. And it always haunts me and chills me to see these blue smiling faces that are the police. So we often forget that whenever we see these images of innocent young black men. Rodney King was only 25 at the time. He was a young man, being beaten like this in these cases of injustice. We have to remember they're not just victims, they're family men. They have friends and family. In fact, Rodney King's first wife, Danetta Lyles King, whom I interviewed, she comes from a family of cops. Everyone in her all the men in her family are sheriffs. They're police officers. She has never watched that video again since 1992 because it triggers her. So, we have to think about the nuance and the tragedy of the people that survived this, the family members. Now, while this was happening, literally 2 weeks after he was beaten in March of 1991, this headline happened. Girl, 15, shot to death over orange juice. I just mentioned her, Latasha Harlins. This is Latasha and her cousin Shanice. They're so cute. They grew up together. This is a family photo they allowed me to use in my book. This is Empire Liquor, where that was just a block away from where they lived. This is Empire Liquor today. It's now a numero uno market. And this is the video. Her death, Latasha's death, was caught live on surveillance video in the store, and it's a very horrific thing to see. Those are her last moments. Now, to talk a little bit about this, Sunja Du and her family, and Latasha Harlins and her family are they have told me that they are not anti-Black, they are not anti-Asian. In fact, Latasha Harlan's family was friends with another store owner who was Korean, but this store was just closer to their house. So that was the unfortunate. Otherwise, they would have gone to the other store where they actually were quite familiar and friends with the Korean store owners there. Sun Ja-do, the reason why she was traumatized, and this is not an excuse, of course, but what people don't understand is she was painted as being anti-Black, which she was not. In fact, her store had been robbed at gunpoint by gang members and other people almost 30 times before Latasha showed up. So as a result, they bought a gun to protect themselves. They did not know that the gun they bought was faulty. It had a shaved down trigger, so it was a hair trigger. So that's why the second degree murder got lowered to manslaughter, because there was an argument about the hair trigger on the gun. So there's a lot of nuance. It's a very complicated trial, and I write about it more in detail that you can find out about in the book. I also have all 600 pages of I read every single court transcript page. I really do a lot of investigative reporting when I work on these books. And I have about maybe 10 minutes left. So if that's okay, if anyone wants to, if Julia or Esther, if you need me to go a little bit faster, just let me know. But I'm keeping track of the time here. But um, and so that's something that I wanted to mention as well. So now, if you saw, I'm going to actually go back a little bit. It's girl 15 shot to death over orange juice, just like you saw in 1965. They just said riots and then it got racialized. Look how quickly this got racialized. Blacks vowed to purchase Korean market. So now it becomes a racial story. And like I said, although anti Blackness does exist in all of our communities, so does allyship and solidarity. One of the things that we never really saw a lot about in 1992 when I did my homework, when I did my research, were the hundreds of Black customers and neighbors who loved the Korean store owners that lived in their area and stood outside their stores to make sure the stores would not burn down. There were so many stories I read of Korean American store owners who hired young Black teenagers and mentored them to work at their store and often donated food to barbecues and to churches. Nobody really talked about it. This is what we saw. So again, it's also about how our stories and how our communities are written about about and portrayed, and who tells our story. One thing about the 1965 Watts Rebellion and also in 1992, there were very few writers of color at the LA Times. In 1965, there were no Black reporters. The LA Times had to hire one of the young Black men that worked in the advertising department. He ended up being part of the Pulitzer Prize winning team for the coverage in 1965. So then you fast forward 30 years later, there is only one Korean American working in the San Diego Bureau, and there's one Korean American photographer, but we don't have any other Korean American reporters. So, and we also had very few Black and Latino reporters as well. And I write about that as well and their frustrations. And so, again, it's about who tells our story as well. And what's interesting is this is on the front page, right? I'm going to go here. This was buried in the back of the LA Times. So people didn't realize that the Korean American community held a toy drive for Latasha Harlan's family. They protested what happened as well. So I'm going to fast forward. That is Judge Joyce Carlin and the decision. And I also, in becoming good friends with the families that I interviewed, I went and paid my respects at their graveyards. So this is Latasha Harlan's grave. This is a memorial playground in her honor. This is me with her cousin and sister today. Now I'm going to go a little bit into Rodney King. So Latasha Harlan's that shooting case, Soon Ja-do was found guilty of manslaughter and given probation in November 1991. He then fast forward to February of 1992. Rodney King's trial is going on. Everyone has seen the beating video. And on April 29th, the four police officers were found not guilty of excessive force and assault. Not guilty. So this headline happens. And then this starts to happen a few hours after the verdicts were announced live on TV. People start gathering to protest. I interviewed the New York Times photographer who took this photo. This is at the corner of Florence and Normandy. I tell people again about how the media, as a former journalist, I know this. This was the crop photo that appeared. Right now, the story is it's an angry Black man shouting and probably swearing at the police officers. He's the antagonist. This is the actual photo. Now, who's the antagonist? The antagonist is not the young Black man. He's the victim. He's angry and saying, why are you leaving Florence and Normandy? Why are you abandoning us? The antagonists now are the 40 police cars that are leaving Florence and Normandy. If you look to the left, you can see a person crying. They're terrified. The tone changes. And then this is what happened soon after at Florence and Normandy. This is my friend Craig Fuji, who was attacked taking photos at Florence and Normandy, the flashpoint. When I interviewed him, he said that he forgave the young man, Damian Williams, who attacked and almost killed him, saying that he understood and felt that the Black community had to protest and commit civil unrest because he said, my family is Japanese American. We were illegally incarcerated during World War II. So that's another example of this type of solidarity and allyship we don't see. Again, you see images of Black gang members pulling an innocent Reginald Denny, a white truck driver, out to beat him nearly to death. But you didn't really see a lot of coverage of the four young Black people who saw this live on their television sets and ran out, got in their cars, and went and saved Reginald Denny's life. Now, I have about 5 minutes. I'm going to kind of stretch it to about 7 or 8 minutes, if you don't mind, Esther, because I do know that we'll have enough time for the questions. These are images I wanted to share too, to show about the other side that wasn't really publicized during this. I like showing this photo too. This is the actor from Baywatch. He's not a cop, but he plays one on TV. He ended up saving the life of an Asian American motorist at Florence and Normandy. Later in an interview, he said the blood of the Japanese American man's blood was on his shirt. He survived, thankfully. And he said that when he went home, people pointed to the blood and said, is that your blood? And he said in the interview, he said, that's when I realized we are the same. And I'm going to have to fast forward. This is Florence and Normandy today. This is the original headquarters for the LAPD, Parker Center. And this is it today. It's now an art installation. Now, I want to talk about the LAPD briefly. Yes, the LAPD was one of the most racist and corrupt police departments in America back in the 1990s and even before. In fact, in March of 2025, there was breaking news that they found out that there was a high amount of racism within the LAPD. They found messages, emails, and conversations among LAPD officers that were very racist. But the twist here is today in 2025 with that article, with that breaking news, the cops were Black, white, Asian, Latino. They were from all backgrounds. So you have to remember it's not about the individual that's being racist, it's about the system that's being racist. But at the same time, the LAPD, despite its racist and corrupt background, was also the most progressive police department in the country. We were the first police department to hire an Asian American cop in 1913, the first black female cop, the first black cop. Mayor Tom Bradley was the first black lieutenant back in the 1940s, back in the day, to lead an integrated black and white squad. They were not segregated. So that's what makes talking about racism hard, is because we often look at it through the lens of right versus wrong, black versus white, evil versus hate, evil versus good, love versus hate. And all of that is true. But we also have to look, we have to take a step back. It's not that simple. You can be a racist police organization, but also be incredibly progressive and liberal. Those two can exist in the same space, on the same page. And that's what makes it hard to talk about this, because we have to look at both, basically the good and the bad. How can these two exist on the same page? And I also interviewed a lot of Asian American and Korean American cops who were trying to protect Koreatown at the time. And I'm gonna wrap up in 5 minutes. I'm gonna have to go a little bit faster. I'm sure we'll talk about this more in the question and answer, so I apologize. These are the police officers that I interviewed. Just to show you today, because Koreatown was abandoned and we suffered $47 million in damage, there are now over 300 Korean American cops in the LAPD. And in fact, that's why we had at one point four Korean American congressmen and women in Congress. We now have the first Korean American senator, Andy Kim, in New Jersey. And we also have the first Korean American and Black biracial Congresswoman, Marilyn Strickland, in Washington State. I'll show a picture of her in a second. So I'm going ahead of myself. Taking a step back, these are the fires that we're seeing. I don't have time to talk about the looting of everything, but I will say that the Latinos were also villainized and stereotyped as carrying out like TV sets and stuff, when really most of them were going for diapers and baby feed, because the pandemic lockdown happened. We basically had a curfew. You could not leave LA. You could not leave your house in LA during the uprising after sunset. People were terrified and needed basic supplies. People were hoarding toilet paper just like today. And then you didn't see the images of how Black Americans were. This is Cornelius Pettis trying to save a store. This is him today. In fact, one of the people that saved Empire Liquor, where Latasha Harlins was shot and killed from burning down, was Latasha Harlan's aunt. She said, "This ain't right," and walked out the door with a pail of water to save that store. And this is Emil Mack. You can read about him in my book. He was a Korean War orphan who was adopted by a Black family and grew up in South Central LA. He identified culturally as Black, but he also knew that he was of Korean descent. So I write about his story and everything. And then I just want to show you, I'm going to wrap up now, but this is, look at the headlines from 1965 and then 1992. Look how similar that is. Now, during the time in Koreatown, the reason why there's so many Korean American cops today is because Radio Korea had to abandon all its programming. And for 6 days, nobody left Radio Korea. They just sat there, didn't go home, didn't take showers. They just, as you can see, drank a lot of soda. And they had the Korean store owners call live on the air to say, "My store is burning down. I need someone to come and save it." The Korean men had to resort to using guns to protect themselves. Many of them were former military, because Korea has military conscription. So these men, where in Korea to this day, men between the ages of 18 and 28 or 29 must serve 3 years in the military. That's why the K-pop band BTS even had to do that. So they had experience with guns. So I interviewed a lot of them today. That's David Jew. I write about him. Now, what's interesting again is the rooftop Korean has become an anti-Black racist meme. So again, our story is being misinterpreted and retold in the wrong way. I'm going to skip past all of this. These are some of the people that I interviewed for my book, Store Owners. I'm going to wrap up by talking about Edward Lee. I mentioned him earlier. He was the 19-year-old, the 18-year-old that was killed trying to protect a store. This is him on his dole. There's a Korean culture thing where on your first birthday, you put a lot of objects in front of you and you have to pick up an object and that determines your future. I picked up a pen, which predicted I would become a writer. Edward Lee picked up a bowl of noodles, which predicted he would live forever. He would have a long life. Now, I'm warning you, I think the triggering photos are about to happen. So if you want to look away, please look away. But oh no, this is the cute picture of him and his sister and his mom. Now we're going to get to the triggering photos. I apologize in advance. This is where he was killed trying to protect a store. And this is the photo that Hyun Kong took. It won the Pulitzer Prize. And, so the irony is that he was supposed to live forever. This photo, going back to it, is what Rodney King saw. And when Rodney King delivered his Can't We All Just Get Along speech, it was because he saw Edward's body on the LA Times. And he talks about that. He talks about Edward Lee in his speech. Now, today, I went to visit Rodney King's gravesite as well, paid my respects with his family. It turns out Edward Lee and Rodney King are buried in the same cemetery. And when I met Edward Lee's mother afterwards, I'm going to fast forward. I don't have time to talk about this, but there was a peace rally and everything like that. And these are some of the people that I interviewed. This is Edward Lee's family. And this is some of the positive uh, stories that started to come out as well afterwards. Oh, and I'm going to show you 1965 Watts, 1992 LA Koreatown, and 2020 Black Lives Matter. Look at how similar all of these are. Now, I say history repeats itself, but so does hope. So, we have to remember that as well. And in terms of hope, the LA Times in 2020 apologized for their coverage, saying that they exaggerated and sensationalized the tension between the Black and Korean community, and they should have also shown a more fair picture of the more positive articles that you just saw that I just showed you. So I thought that was really amazing of the LA Times to do that. And then these are the Korean Americans who also were inspired by 1992 to run for office. And this is Andy Kim. He went viral in 2020 for uh, what no was it 20, oh yeah no it was 2020 January 6th, the insurrection. He picked up the trash afterwards. This is Marilyn Strickland. Her father is Black and her mother is Korean. She was actually born in Korea, and she identifies as a Black woman, but also is very close to her Korean heritage. So she wore her mother's hanbok on the day of her swearing in Congress. And just going back to Edward Lee, his mother told me that his fortune, the noodles representing long life, did come true, because when I gave her my book, she said, "We're going to talk about him for the rest for eternity." So his fortune did come true. And this is me at my dole. And I'm going to end by talking about my dad. I'm going to wrap up by saying in 1963, my dad was one of the first Asian Americans and Korean Americans to go to Tennessee Tech in 1963 in Tennessee. And he died in 2016. And his uncle, my uncle, his brother, told me that when he visited my dad in Tennessee, they went to the movie theater and they didn't know which door to go through for the bathroom. One door said colored and the other door said white. And so this is the burden and the responsibility and the accountability we have as non-Black people of color to say Black Lives Matter and to dismantle both doors, because if Black lives don't matter, then none of our lives matter. And that's kind of the purpose of my book, is to show that the Black community has always been here for the Koreans, and the Koreans have been, but will continue to be even more so for the Black community as well. Because I can talk to you all day about anti-Asian racism, but I'm talking in an echo chamber. We have to have dialogue. We have to move forward together. And that is the mall that's featured on the cover of my book, and it's still standing today. And I'm going to end with a picture. Oh, the one thing I will say is we did a sound check. I was going to play my violin, but I can't because we have sound trouble. Wait, where is it? Here's my violin right here. I can't play it. But one of the store owners that I interviewed for my book died of COVID-19. And so we this was at the height of when before vaccines were available. So I interviewed him on Zoom. So I ended up playing at his funeral. I played his two favorite songs, which were Arirang, which is a Korean folk song, and also John Denver's Country Road, because he loved America. And so I wanted to share that with you as well, because this happened 30 years ago, and so people are getting older. A lot of them are leaving us. So it is up to us to keep their stories alive. And I'm ending with my cats, because I talk to you a lot about a lot of very difficult, heart-rending topics. So I thought my cats might cheer you up. So I am going to stop the share. Hang on, let me Oh, sorry. Trying to get here. All right, and I stopped the share. So there we go. So I think we have time for Q&A and everything. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paula. That was incredible. I loved that performance and I loved this book. I have a question for you, if I can start, and then I can open it up to everybody else.
Mhm.
I just finished the book and I noticed you give a full comprehensive analysis of everybody in your book. And you never just categorize people as good or bad. And why do you think that this is such an important part of your storytelling?
That's a really great question. Good people can do bad things, first of all. You know, bad people can do good things. So I think that's at the heart of it. For me, for both to take a step back, for Vincent Chin, I'm the first person to interview the man who killed him, who beat him to death with a baseball bat, since Michael Moore interviewed him at his house in 1987, you know. And the man who killed Vincent Chin cried. We hugged each other. And I cried afterwards. And that's when I realized anger, justice, and compassion are not mutually exclusive. I can be angry about what happened to Vince. I can be angry at justice not being served for Vincent Chin, and I can be angry at Mr. Ebens for what he did. I can be angry at the LAPD for what they did to Rodney King and to Sunja Du and Judge Joyce Carlin for Latasha Harlan's death, and for the fact that, you know, Edward Lee was killed in the crossfire trying to protect a store. I can be so angry that there's no justice for any of them. But I can also have compassion for the perpetrators because that can all exist on the same plane. Because I think that once our ang- I think we have to be angry to achieve justice. But once we achieve justice and the anger cools, what should rise from that is our compassion and empathy, and to understand how can we prevent this from happening again. You know, what can we do to make sure that you know, people not go there, not do that. You know, what are the ways? So that's why I approached everyone that way. You know, not everyone in the LAPD is a villain. Not every, you know, like there's it's very, you know, I mean, it was like I said, talking to Rodney King's first wife, finding out that she comes from a family of black cops, that was something I was not expecting. So that's why I was like, and in fact, even with Vincent Chin, I think my biggest problem was I assumed at first, before I started doing my research, that he was a stereotypical evil KKK hat wearing, racist, horrible man. Turns out he's a good father. He's a good husband. He's a family man. He's all of this. How could he do that? You know, so that made it a lot more complex, and I think that that's why I did what I did. Really tried to give everybody a chance to see the humanity behind everybody, so that way when we judge their actions, we can come from a place of better understanding.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That was a, an amazing answer. Anybody here have a question? Okay.
Hi, Paula. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, I'm Leslie. I'm one of the librarians here at Denver Public Library, and
Oh,
I read the first four chapters of your book, which is amazing. So, thank you so much for writing this and bringing more information about the Rodney King because I was a child when that happened. So, I remember hearing about that a lot. I want to know how long did it take you to get all of your research for the book, and how often you went to the LA Public Library to, to do your research?
that's a great question. I actually used a lot of the LA Public Library has a blog, and they had all this great information about redlining. Unfortunately, I for going to the library and for the LA Public Library, I went there. I went to the Pasadena Historical Society because Rodney King grew up in Altadena and Pasadena in that area, so their historical society has a lot of information on Rodney King and his family as well. And so I did go to these places, but unfortunately, when the book sold, it was at the height of the first few years of lockdown, before the vaccines were available. So a lot of it had to be done by phone. You know, I had to talk to the librarians on Zoom and things like that. So I wasn't physically there as much at the start, but near the end, I was able to go and say hi and thank you, and look at all of that. So it was a little surreal working on both books because they all kind of came out right around that whole lockdown 2020 scary year. And I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, and then I also even went to the Tennessee archives as well, to research stuff about my dad, National Archives for Vincent Chin. But I love the LA Public Library. Actually, I wrote there before 2020. I often went there. I'd bring my laptop and I'd go hide in the children's place. I love writing there. It's such a beautiful part of the library. And Beverly Hills Library, which is close to where I live too. I love going there too because they have a little coffee house inside. So I would just sit there. So libraries are also great, not just for reading, but for getting good writing done.
Hey, thank you so much.
Sure.
Hold on just a moment.
We're seeing. Does anybody else here have a question? We have another question.
Hi, I'm Chelsea. I'm another librarian. Um,
Hello.
so I know that you did a lot of original reporting and interviewing for this process, and your index and bibliography is incredible. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Um, how did you go about setting these interviews up? Because these are not easy subjects to broach with people. If you could speak to that process, that'd be great.
Yeah, because I was a journalist for so long, I wrote for the Seattle Times, Detroit News, and People magazine. I'm used to just cold knocking on people's doors or just calling or emailing or whatever. So I'm not afraid. I'm not. Yeah, I'm a very social. I'm obviously like a very like extrovert type person. So that's in terms of that, that's not an issue. However, what I do is before I even do the live interview, I do my homework first. I read every single book I could on Latasha Harlan, saw all the documentaries, same with Edward Lee and Rodney King. I really, and also researching the history of the LAPD, the LA Fire Department, everything. I did all my homework first, read all the court transcripts, and everything. And then that's when I felt ready to then contact them. Now I know I'm also asking them to relive the worst time of their life, relive a horrible traumatic memory. So, and also I did the same thing for Vincent Chin in that book. So I would always apologize, first of all, and say, I'm really sorry for triggering you. And I always made it clear that the people that I was interviewing knew that I know that I get to leave and go have ice cream and play with my cats while they spend the rest of the day crying because I broke their heart because I made them remember and relive what happened. Because I noticed when I interviewed people, um, they weren't just remembering what happened, they were reliving it. I literally saw body language change. When I talked to the amazing and lovely Shanice Harlan, she was only 14 when it happened. Physically, she's a beautiful grown woman. I would see kind of her shoulders hunch a little bit, and her voice goes up like she's a teenager again. Same with Vincent Chin's friends. Same with talking to Laura King. Suddenly, she's an 8-year-old child again. And I realized they are so brave and so generous to be willing to relive that for me. It's a little bit like going into a time machine. So I'm very, very respectful that way. Um, so I have to earn people's trust. So I'm not going to just say, tell me about what happened in 1992. We got to talk about other things first. So it actually took a couple of interviews to gain enough trust to say, okay, now I'm going to ask, now here comes the 60 minutes portion. I'm going to start asking you the hard hitting questions. I threw you the softball questions at first. Now we're going to go into the deep stuff. So it's a little bit, in a way, I guess it's like therapy where you talk about, and then you have the breakthrough and you find out, oh my gosh, this is why I am the way I am. So it is a little bit, it is like therapy, and it's like therapy for me too, because I had what is called secondary trauma, because I would get like, for example, just I joke about this with my husband. I yell at him and be like, why didn't you take out the cat litter? And then I start bawling. I just like start sobbing. And my husband's like, it's not that big a deal. I'll go take the cat litter out. Why are you crying like this? And then I realized, oh, it's because I read the police report about what happened to Rodney King, or oh, I saw the autopsy report for Vincent Chin or Edward Lee or Latasha Harlan's. And so there was a lot of secondary trauma too. So I was very, very sensitive when I interviewed people. I do want to say uh, the most difficult thing about the LA book, and I wrote an essay about it for Hornbook magazine. If you want to take a look, the title is called My Own Sa Igu, which is what we call what happened in 1992 in the Korean community. I can talk about that too in a second. But in that, I actually reached out to Sunjadu's family because I thought I interviewed the white man who beat an Asian American man to death with a baseball bat. I earned his trust, and I really respect his family. Of course, Sunjadu's family is going to want to talk to me because they're Korean American. I'm Korean American. They've been unfairly villainized and vilified and stereotyped in the media. Let me get their side of the story. Let me talk to them about everything. People don't understand that Mrs. Du wrote a beautiful letter of remorse for the Harlan's family. There's a lot of things happened for her, and her family said no. They said no, and I had to go back and ask several times, and it was very obvious they did not want to talk to me, and it broke my heart, and I cried. But I realized later, and I write about it in the book, I realized they did it out of what is known as jung. That's a Korean concept of it's love mixed with sympathy, and jung can only exist between two people or more. It cannot exist just with one person. And I realized the Du family was exhibiting jung to me. They were protecting their mother, because they're just not ready. I don't think they'll ever be ready to talk publicly about what happened, but their silence spoke volumes. So one of the biggest lessons I learned in this particular book was sometimes not getting the interview was just as important as getting the interview.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer. Do we have any other questions? I have another question for you. Um, this is something that I found really interesting. Typically, in historical nonfiction, books can feel very flat, like as if anybody could have written it and it would be the same. But yours has a specific voice that is very much yours. And I was just wondering how you were able to give the book your own personal touches in your own voice, even through a historical nonfiction lens.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I think it's because I'm a storyteller. Whether I'm playing my violin, I'm telling you a story with music. Whether I'm writing a TV show like The West Wing or Supergirl, I'm telling a story. When I wrote my novel for HarperCollins, I'm telling a story. So I look at history I look at the story part of history. And anyone can write the Wikipedia, the Encyclopedia Britannica version. This happened on this date. This happened here. Here's a quote. Here's all of that. Um, for me, story comes from people. It's a story to me is character plus emotion. A character has a want or a need or a desire, and there's an obstacle in their way. How do they overcome that obstacle to get to their goal? And if they can't overcome that obstacle, how has their life changed forever? That's classic Aristotle plot telling. That's classic storytelling. So I look at history that way. Who was, I'm just off the top of my head, I don't know, like Abraham Lincoln, who was he as a little boy? What made him go down the path to become president and so forth? Who was Rodney King? What, all that kind of stuff. So I look at everything as I'm telling a personal, emotional, character-driven story. So I use my novel writing technique, which is with novels, it's about theme. It's about symbolism and metaphor and kind of seeing a journey, the heroic journey of a character. That's a novel. For screenwriting, for TV writing and movies, but especially for TV, it's a limited series on Netflix. It's like what happens at the end of episode one that you're like, you got to binge watch and hit next and see the next episode. So what are the cliffhangers? What are the plot devices that propel the story, make it engaging and exciting? So I think I used and then, of course, the journalism is one of the librarians just mentioned. I think there are 8,000 footnotes in my book. So the journalist part of me is like, I better have three sources to back up everything. I cannot tell you how many times I re-listened to the recordings of my interviews to make sure I didn't have a typo or misquoted someone. It just, oh, it was the research, doing the annotation was a nightmare. So, so I think what it is it's combining everything and it's a holistic way of how I approach storytelling. So at the end of the day, it's about a person's story. So I think and then I think that's how my voice, my stylistic voice comes out because I'm really kind of writing to me. It's a novel, you know.
That's great. Thank you so much for that answer. Do we have any other questions? Are there any online? Okay, well, yeah, what's next for you? Do you have any future plans? I saw that you're flying to Korea at the end of this month. Is
Oh,
that
that's
something you're
right.
very excited
Yeah, I'm going. Okay, so oh, and I do want to take a step back and say I mentioned earlier about Saigu, so it'll tie in with Korea. So one thing I write about my book is I'm a Gen Xer. So I was 20, 19, I was 23. I was just about to graduate from Columbia School of Journalism where I got my master's, and I was actually on a date. So I saw the I mean, we actually no, when I was on the date, everything had already, the world had exploded, LA had exploded, but I remember seeing live on the TV screen President George Bush, the father, giving a speech, and we were at a bar, and I said, "Okay, date is on pause. I've got to watch and see what the president has to say." And it was the first time a sitting president in America has ever mentioned and acknowledged the Korean American community. And he didn't say Korean; he said Korean American. And I didn't vote for him, but I'm a Democrat. But I did appreciate that he said that. That meant a lot to me. I was like, oh, we're not invisible. And one thing is that back then we called it the LA riots. And that's because Martin Luther King said a riot is a voice for the unheard. Unfortunately, as you saw in my slideshow, it gets racialized. It becomes a black riot, it becomes an Asian riot, it becomes racialized, and the group protesting gets villainized. So that's why today we call it either civil unrest, a rebellion, or more popularly, we call it an uprising. For the Korean American community, we call it uprising as well, but some Koreans, and I get this, a lot of Korean Americans were like, oh, if you call it the uprising, then that makes us the bad guy. Like you're uprising against us as well. And it's a little bit more nuanced than that. We're not all, racist, evil store owners exploiting the black neighborhood. You know, is that true individually for some people? Probably, yeah, but it's not for the whole. Nobody should be made into a monolith. So in Korean culture, we tend to name things by numbers. So, for example, the Korean War started on June 25th, 1950. So we call it Yu Ego. You. I don't speak Korean very well. It's like I don't speak Korean. I speak like baby words. But the numbers Yu Ego that stands for 6, 2, and then O, which is 5. So 625, June 25th. So the Korean American community said, we're going to call the LA riots, the LA uprising, Sa-igu. Sa means 4. So E means 2, and gu means 9. So 429, April 29th, the day that it happened. So I just wanted to let people know. So, and that's Sa-igu is what they call the first time the Korean American community realized we cannot isolate ourselves. We have to become part of America. We have to get involved politically. We can't just isolate ourselves in Koreatown. We have to become part of the fabric of America. So it was really a political awakening for Korea. Now, speaking of Korea, I'm going May 23rd through June 1st. I will be speaking at Seoul Foreign School. That is my alma mater. Although I was born and raised in America, my dad had a job transfer. So from 1977 to 1982, I did live in Seoul, Korea, and I went to Seoul Foreign School, which is an American language international school. So my brother and I went there, and I actually was in Korea in September of last year. I actually haven't been back to Korea since 1982. So September 2024 was my first time back, and oh, it changed a lot. Like I was like culture shock for me. But and while I was there, I called Seoul Foreign School and said, "Hey, can I visit the campus?" And they're like, "Why don't you give a speech?" So I ended up doing that, and then because I did that, I was so honored. They chose me as their alumna of the year. So I will be giving a speech on what is it, May 30th. I'll be giving a speech at the high school graduation. So that's why I'll be there. And I'll be doing some research too on another book that I'm writing. I'm working on a Korean War book. So, and I did some research in September, so I'll be doing more research again there. So that's the next travel plan for me.
That's so exciting. Do you have any last things you want to say about the book before we wrap up?
Oh, I'm trying to think if I missed anything. Oh, Oh gosh, it's in the book. I had to skim through the photos, but two young people that I met, Carol Parks, she wrote a book called My Life as a Cashier, and she is in my book. She's the 10-year-old girl who ended up working the night shift at the gas station. So she would sleep in a sleeping bag on the floor, and she and her mom would wash rice in the gas station bathroom sink and everything. So when I went to visit the gas station, the pictures were in my slideshow. She pointed to the floor, and my I almost started crying. I couldn't believe a little 10-year-old girl would be sleeping there, And she showed me the bullet holes that are still in the walls from what happened in 1992. So that was really humbling. And she now is getting her PhD at UC Riverside in Korean American Studies. And so I just think that's an amazing story. And one thing she told me, oh, this is a good library story. She said how she escaped Compton and the gas station, and there were unfortunately a lot of people who were addicted to drugs because crack cocaine. I write about crack cocaine and how it decimated the Black community. She had people smoking crack cocaine right outside the gas station and things like that. She said how she escaped was through reading. She devoured Anne of Green Gables. That changed her life, realizing that there was a life outside of Compton and the gas station and the poverty where she lived. So, and that's what made her a voracious bookworm. And she went to the library all the time. Other library things, Latasha Harlan's grandmother. Also, she was a teen mother, but she went and got her high school degree and wanted to go to college. So while she was raising Latasha's mother, and getting ready to move to LA, where the rest of the family would then move. They originally were in Illinois. She would go to the library every night and just read with her baby asleep. So she loved, and I thought there were a lot of bookworms in this. And I interviewed Kurt Kim, who this is a fun thing because I'm a musician, but did you know that gangster rap, like Ice-T, Ice Cube, NWA, Public Enemy, none of that stuff would have existed without a Korean store owner. Kirk Kim's father was the only one that sold those gangster rap and just rap hip hop records, CDs in 1991, 1989 to 1992 and onwards because Tower Records and other major outlets were too scared because they thought this music is scary. It's anti-cop. You have Ice T and Cop Killer, or Ice Cube and Black Korea and all that kind of stuff. They're like it's dangerous music. So they didn't stock the music. So everyone went to the Compton swap meet to stall number 17, I think it was, where Kirk's dad had a bunch of so Public Enemy used to hang out with them. Easy E would come and visit, and Kirk's mom would yell at Easy E. She'd be like, "Pull your pants up." Shaquille O'Neal, he had a rap album. He hung out with them. Snoop Dogg would hang out with them. Like they all, and they called them pops and mom. So it's like that was an amazing story that I didn't know about, and I just thought that was really beautiful how music was a way. And what's beautiful, and I wrote about it in my book, is that both his parents died sadly of cancer within just a few years of each other, and all the hip hop and rap artists were the pallbearers and went to the funeral and everything. So that's just, I just thought like some cool. So there's a lot of like cool things that I hope teenagers would like in the book too, because I know the music's still popular today. And yeah, and his father was called the Korean godfather of gangster rap. That was his nickname. So just a lot of fun. There's some I think as difficult as it is to read the book, I really tried to just celebrate the fun moments because there's a lot of really cool pop culture and stuff that happened in 1992 that as a Gen Xer, I want people to remember and find joy in as well, because it's not just all sad. I mean, it is a very sad book, but there's joy at the end, and I'm still. I actually just texted the Harlans, the Kings, and the Lees recently, just to say, hey, I'm thinking of you on this anniversary, and just oh, and I'll show you. This is so Shanice Harlan's has her own candle company. They make great gifts. It's called Sensuous Soul. So I highly recommend you check out her Instagram page. But I love these candles. They make great gifts. And so we still keep in touch and everything. And Mrs. Lee is still, as a mother, I don't think she'll ever get over it. She texted me a beautiful thing. Oh, actually, if you want, I'll end with this just to remind you not to go on too sad of a note. But where is it? It's if you just give me 2 seconds. Oh yeah. So I texted Mrs. Lee to say I'm very sorry again for your loss and on this anniversary. And she wrote, "Thank you for not forgetting and contacting me. As you said, my heart really hurts. It feels like both my arms are gone. I can't control my body. I pray that you always stay healthy and have a blessed day. Thank you again." So it just shows she's such a gentle, sensitive, beautiful woman. So I just wanted to share that as well. So as we, once we wrap all this up, please keep the Lees, Harlans, and King families close to your heart this week, please. Thank you.
Yay! Thank you so much. I don't know if you can hear them, but everybody here is clapping.
Oh, thank you. K-pop
Um,
hearts.
oh, yes. We want to take a group picture.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you'll just be in this backdrop. I know you can't see us, but you'll be there.
Okay.